So if you're trying to get buttery cinematic motion without hiring a second set of hands, or if you're chasing that perfect product shot that moves, this might be one of the best sliders you've never heard of. This is the Trexo Converta. I've been using both the 400 and 600 model of these sliders and their pan and tilt modules. This thing has made me both love and also kind of scream at motorized sliders again. So let's check them out. So like I said, I have both the Converta 400 and 600. Both use the exact same slider design and same weight capacities, but they basically just have different travel lengths. The 400 gives you 40 centimeters or about 16 inches of total movement, and that's honestly perfect for product B-roll in a small studio space like I have. But the 600 gives you a whopping 60 centimeters of travel or about 23.5 inches, which is really great for longer moves like interview push-ins or time-lapse motions. The sliding smoothness of these sliders is actually really solid. The motor does not jerk at the end of loops, which is a huge deal if you have a continuous loop going on for something like an interview. It decelerates and reverses in a way that does not ruin the shot, which is really nice. You can absolutely run clear loops with B-roll without any retakes, and at the budget that we're going to talk about that this slider sits in, there's a lot of them that have issues with this. For the build quality, absolute rock solid. Everything's metal, nothing feels like a toy. I don't feel like I have to baby my gear, and I felt totally fine mounting my Canon R8 with the pan and tilt modules and leaving it running unattended. It feels professional, and that does matter when you've got other things to focus on, and if you're going to be in front of clients, you want your gear to look good. One of my favorite parts that sets this slider aside from the rest of the sliding industry is actually the turntable accessory. The Converta sliders all come with an included product turntable, so you simply screw it onto the slider, set your product on top of it, and you've got an instant rotating product shot with motion. It lets you find unique backgrounds, lighting, or angles. The only issue is that the motion is tied to the slider belt, and it uses this little extruder screw so that you can't move the camera without spinning the turntable, and you can't spin the turntable without moving the camera. So this means that you can't have a static product shot on this turntable with the camera in motion, which is kind of a bummer, but still, it's really cool to have a slider that has this built into it, considering no other slider on the market does this. Now, one quick thing to also be aware of is that your lens will literally collide with the product or the plate. So it is very useful, but it is a little bit limiting in some regards. So you do have to be wary of where you set your loop points, because you don't want your camera and lens smashing against the actual product that you're trying to review. Now, one of the things that I really like about these Converta sliders is something that I saw Edelkrone do a long time ago, and it's through its learning mode. This is where Trexo kind of punches above its price range. What it is that you physically move the camera to your start and end points, and the system records the path. You can even use the app to take a picture of the positioning, and it will remember where to point the camera based on that picture, which is pretty cool. It's actually surprisingly intuitive to use and lets you get really creative, especially if you're using the pan tilt modules, because they all work paired together. So you get really natural feeling arcs and movement without needing to set a bunch of digital keyframes. However, it's not perfect. I've had the pan and tilt and slider occasionally drift out of sync, so if you're filming a centered subject, you'll notice a slow slide off frame. It is minor, but it's enough to ruin certain shots, especially for things like me where I'm doing a lot of product videography and I need my subject to stay perfectly up close with my macro lenses. It's extremely noticeable whenever you're up close like that. And it is kind of hit or miss, to be honest, because there's some times where the learning mode works absolutely perfect and it's killer, and there's some times where it's like they're just a little bit off sync, and I don't know what that is. I think it's going to be something that Trexo needs to consider updating in their firmware for both the slider and the app. There's something clunky going on there. Now, one thing I really like about the slider is actually the little adjustment feet. Those are really clutch. You can move the slider on a tripod and leave a quick mount plate on it, or just set it directly on a desk, and because the legs extend far enough, you don't have to remove that plate underneath it. So you can just throw it back on the tripod when you need it. It also allows you to level the slider, which makes setup really fast if you're moving between environments. Now, the slider has its own internal battery, and you can charge it via USB-C, which is nice, and you can also keep it plugged in when in use, which is really, really great because you're not having to bring extra batteries with you, and there's no bulky battery plate hanging off the back of it like some other sliders. But if you forget your power bank or don't have a place to plug in, you are going to be extremely limited because the battery life has not been the best from what I've seen with other sliders. It's not bad, but I would kind of put it in the middle ground. But the upside is that you can keep it plugged in while it's in use, but in a fix, you are typically going to have some type of USB-C charging device, so you can plug in and keep it running when you need to. Now, quick break while I go reprogram a shot for you to see with this slider. I want to give a huge shout out to Proton VPN for sponsoring sponsoring this video. Proton is my go-to for securing my connection, especially when I'm uploading videos or accessing cloud files from public networks. It's open source, based in Switzerland, and does not log your activity like most free VPNs do. And I like that it just works. There's a free tier with no speed limits, and you can use it across multiple devices. So if you're a creator, gamer, or just someone who values privacy, Proton VPN keeps you protected without slowing you down. You can try it for free with the link down below, and honestly, it's just one of those tools you should already be using, but if you use the link down below, you can also get 64% off the paid version, which gives even more features. Okay, so I do want to dive into some of the things about these Trexo sliders that are a bit frustrating. There's a lot of good things about these sliders, but I will say the Trexo app experience is not great. It's rather unintuitive, especially if you're not used to using sliders, and even after watching some of Trexo's own tutorial videos, it still took me a while to figure out how to unlock the motors or use learning mode. And in fact, I still have to do some things from the sliders onboard menu and then others from the app. So you kind of have to have this hybrid setup, and I'm not a fan of that. I'd like to do everything from either one or the other, and preferably on the slider itself. I'm a big fan of, like, for instance, my top rig SL60 that I reviewed a while back. Being able to do everything on the slider itself is really, really nice. With Trexo, you have to do this hybrid work setup, and I just don't like that. A great example of this is learning mode. It's only accessible via the onboard menu on the slider and not in the app from what I could find. And when I do try to send the settings from the app, the slider sometimes doesn't register them at all. It says on the app that I have my points set, but whenever I try to set new points with the app and send it to the slider, it then will say that I need to have points set even though they're already literally on the screen. So that's a big frustration for me. Also, changing the speed and the smoothness curves of whenever it loops, they don't always translate between the devices. And again, when I try to send it to the device, it just doesn't work very well. Another thing that I'm not a big fan of is how the pairing with the pan tilt motors where the slider actually works. It's very tedious. You power each one on, which is not a big deal, but then you assign it a direction, whether it's going to be panning or tilting, and then you sync it through the app. I would love for them to automatically pair with the slider, because if you're like me, like I said a second ago, and you hate using apps for your camera gear, this is where Trexo needs to really improve, because if they could just pair by turning them on and be all connected together, it would improve the user experience so much. Now, I will say, if you're using a phone, it is way easier using this system. These sliders actually come with a phone clamp. They are fantastic to use with a mobile device, and it's especially noticeable whenever you use the incline mode. So incline basically increases the torque of the motors to allow it to carry a heavier payload at an angle upwards. However, I have found that if I were to put my Canon R8 with the pan and tilt motors on there, it really struggles to lift that entire payload capacity up, because whenever it's going up, the payload maxes out at 6.6 pounds. The Canon R8 is a really light mirrorless camera, so that's definitely a problem for anything heavier than that. So it's really designed to use your phone with if you're going to use pan and tilt on an incline. But what's nice about the pan and tilt motors is that although there is some balancing that you need to do, kind of like a gimbal, it's actually really simple to throw a phone on there because it's so light, and the motors don't struggle at all, which is really nice. That's great for beginners especially. Now, one quick shout out that Trexo is just now coming out with is an accessory called the Axis Bridge, and that allows you to use a DJI RS series gimbal instead of their pan and tilt motors. Now, I don't have a DJI gimbal, so I wasn't able to check out the bridge, but I do love that idea. So basically what you do is you mount the gimbal onto the slider, and it does all the pan and tilt modes for you through the app. That said, I do have a Zhiyun gimbal that I reviewed before, and I would rather use that since I already have it. So I do hope that there's future firmware supports for more brand integrations in this regard. Now, I do want to be aware of other sliders on the industry that are kind of floating around this price range. Compared to something like the Axoon Top Rig SL60 that I mentioned earlier, and I've already reviewed, the Trexo system has a much higher skill ceiling, but the SL60 is simpler and easier for beginners. It doesn't need an app and has built-in parallax mode, which is really nice, but the Trexo, especially at $885 for the 400 Pro package, offers significantly more creative control if you're willing to deal with some quirks. So I would actually put the Trexo slider at a more intermediate category that you move up to once you're done with your beginner slider needs. Now, the reason that I mentioned that 400 Pro as my top pick is because that 60 centimeters of slider length is very, very large. You really don't need that extra slider length in the grand scheme of things when that's the only thing that you're paying extra for. If it had stronger motors, if it had a higher payload capacity, then maybe it's worth looking at the bigger model. But honestly, the 400 is plenty for most people's needs, and it can still handle the pan and tilt module, which I actually think are necessary. I think this slider is great for just a normal slider with a turntable, but just for a little bit more, you can actually get the pan tilt modules, which gives gives it so much more functionality. And so if your budget for a slider is under $1,000, I think this might be the one. It's really, really solid. But I will say that if you're impatient, if you hate apps, or you just want to shoot quickly with minimal setup, it might not be for you. There's still some growing pains that Trexo has to go through with this sliding system. But if you're willing to deal with clunky software and a bit of a learning curve, the Trexo sliders give you shots that genuinely punch above its price class. So just be ready to troubleshoot and plan around its limitations and you'll be good to go. With that said, I will be keeping this slider as my main slider for B-roll moving forward. I really do like it that much. But with that said, I really want to see Trexo push some firmware updates soon to smooth out the rough edges. So if you're interested, links are in the description. This is not sponsored by Trexo. They're not even affiliate links. They just sent it out for me to check out and use. And as always, you're going to get a very transparent view of a product from me. It's not perfect, but I think it's pretty good. But definitely let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are on these sliders, or if you have preferred brands that you want to take a look at. I'm happy to consider bringing other ones to the channel. But thank you so much for being a part of this video today and watching. Again, I'm Corey with Freaky Tech Reviews. I'll see you next time. Real quick before you go, YouTube thinks that you might like this video right here, so be sure to check it out and continue exploring the Freaky Tech Reviews channel.